Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Fix Computers. I kind of spoiled this video for myself, so I'm a little bit annoyed. So we're going to come in halfway through this, but at the very least, hopefully this can be a very quick just cheat sheet video on how to approach this problem that I've got with this laptop, and I'm hoping that I can fix it here as well. So here's the issue. I've got here a Dell Inspiron 15. So let me move this nonsense out of the way. So classic Dell Inspiron 15 laptop here. I think this is a 3505 or something like that. And it originally came in with a busted DC jack. So there's the inside of the DC jack. As you can see, that's completely mangled in there. Pretty straightforward. So I ordered a new DC jack on eBay for £5 or whatever. And as soon as it came in, I put that DC jack in, expecting it to be a nice, easy job. And the laptop refused to charge. It had power from the charger, but it would not recognize the charger and refused to charge the battery. Well, Dell laptops, there's a couple of brands of laptops out there that have a sense pin going to the charger. So the two most prominent ones are Dell and HP. Apple do as well, but obviously Apple is Apple, different department, whatever. Incidentally, though, the Dell one has a lot in common with Apple because the sense pin, they both use a what I believe is a protocol or a system called one wire. And that is a single wire going to the charger that allows the laptop to communicate with the charger and for the charger to identify itself to the charger and say, I provide this many watts of power. So this means that a Dell laptop, let's say you've got a Dell laptop that is a 65 watt laptop and you plug in a 45 watt charger. The laptop can power up, but because the laptop has detected that it's a 45 watt charger, it knows not to try and charge the battery from that because it will just overload the charger. Whereas a dumb laptop, like say an Acer or something like that, it will just draw as much power as it can from the charger at the risk of overloading the charger. And then the charger cuts out or you have other problems. If you've got a load of mangled pins in the old DC jack, there's a very good chance that when the customer shoved the charger into there, or at the point where it broke, one of those pins probably got mashed to the back of the DC jack. And if that pin then shorted 19 volts from the charger into the sense wire, that's not going to do it any good. You put 19 volts into a signal wire that goes to the EC, and you blow up the signal line. Now the motherboard can't detect any charges, and you've got problems. So what did I do next? Well, I took the motherboard out of the laptop, and I decided to go for a visual inspection to see if I could see any visual damage. The DC jack is here. Let's just bring the camera down a bit. The DC jack is here, and so I flipped over the board and just started looking around for where the power was going. And as I mentioned, I got lucky because I spotted a damaged component here. Now, before I show you that under the microscope, we're going to switch to the schematic so we can look at what the line is that we're actually looking for. So here is our schematic for the laptop. This motherboard is an LAK001P, and here is the schematic for it. So how do we know where to start looking here? Well, we're looking for the DC in jack, basically. And I could probably find it by just, searching around here. I'm sure there's, if we have a look at the block diagram somewhere, we'll find power inputs and stuff like that. But a quicker way to do some basic navigation is if we look back to the board here, here is the DC connector, and you can see that we've got PJP DC1 written under the jack. So let's search for that. So PJP DC1. There we go. And that brings us down to here. So this is page 82. Here is our DC jack coming into the laptop. And if we have a look at the breakdown of this, we've got some ground pins here. Down the bottom, we've got more ground pins here with some EMI protection and stuff like that. Pins 6 and 5, that's our 19 volt rail. So that goes across, and we've got some bulk decoupling capacitors. We've got an input inductor, and then that becomes the DC in rail. And then that's going to go over to whatever then happens with this. But the bit that we're interested in is this wire in the middle here, pin 3. That's our sense wire. So this guy comes along here. It also has a filter inductor on it that's there just to soak up, EMI and stuff like that. It's labeled PSID, so power supply ID. So that goes along here, it comes up here, and if we keep following it all the way along, it's going to go through all of this nonsense, blah, 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 and it's going to go under this massive Dell Agile use thing, so we can't see what that's called. However, this is going to this PS_ID signal, and that is going to go back to, I think it goes back to the charge control chip. We could search for it, but that's not what we care about. The point is, it goes back to charger management, power management, and stuff like that. But before it gets there, there's actually a lot of protection on this circuit, which is what all of this guff is. And this is the bit we're interested in. Now, because this is going to a very sensitive place in the laptop, and Dell are not idiots, they've actually put a sizable amount of protection on this signal to prevent damage from stray signals, like the 19-volt line directly adjacent to it getting shorted into it. They've got an empty pin on the connector as well, just in case. Unfortunately, that didn't help it this time. But if we have a look here, so this dual TVS diode, it doesn't need to be a dual diode. You can see that pin 3 is just not connected, but presumably they're using these in many other places in the laptop. So they've got loads of dual diodes, so they just stuck a dual diode in there. So this diode, as you can see, it conducts in the direction of the arrow, and it's a Zener diode. So what this means is that it is normally conductive from pin 1 up to pin 2 and pin 3. Now, because this is ground, that means it does nothing. However, being a Zener diode, it has a breakdown voltage, and that breakdown voltage is at a very controlled amount. We could look up the spec of that diode to see exactly what that breakdown voltage is, but the point is, it's going to be something that's above a couple of volts, because being a signal wire, we're only expecting to see maybe 1 or 2 volts here. So if there is a voltage on this signal wire greater than the breakdown voltage, then this will break down and it will conduct in reverse from pin 2 down to pin 1 down to ground. So if 19 volts hits this rail, this guy is going to short that down to ground and clamp the voltage, protecting the circuit. So if that fails, we've also got this, whatever this is here. I think that's a MOSFET with all of the body diodes visible on it. So this is also acting as an on-off switch for the power supply ID. It looks like here the gate voltage is being biased by this resistor divider. So it sets it at a certain level. And if the 5-volt rail comes up, that then sets the gate voltage to another level, which probably enables the MOSFET, allowing the signal to continue through. So we get past that. Then going through here, we've got another limiting resistor, and there are more signals that again are biasing these lines. And finally, we've got the PSID signal going out from this affair. So if we're in the situation that we're in, where we've got no PSID signal, or the PSID signal is not working properly, this is the area of the schematic that we're going to be wanting to look at first. We want to look through all of this and figure out if these are being set properly. So you'd want to check if this 3-volt signal is appearing, if this 5-volt signal is appearing. You'd want to check if this resistor divider network is set correctly, and so on and so forth. Now, thankfully, in this instance, and in a lot of instances, it's actually a lot easier than that. The first line of defense is this TVS diode, and so that was the first thing I went looking for on this motherboard. So let's go looking for it on this motherboard. So we're going to find this on the back of the motherboard somewhere, because the top is taken up by CPUs and RAM modules and Wi-Fi modules and stuff like that. There's not, we've got like big power over here, but there's not a lot going on around the actual DC connector. So if we flip the board over, you can see we've got more supporting components on the bottom, and also the EC is over here. So this is kind of where we're expecting things to go to eventually. And that was the point where I was just doing the visual inspection and I spotted this guy here. So let me go under the microscope and I'll show you what I spotted. So here, this guy has got a hole in it. That is literally just, that's emitted a puff of smoke there. So that has released the magic smoke. And if we look at the designator, it's designated PD1. So P is going to be a power designator, D is going to be a diode. So we've got PD1 and we've got PQ1 there. So we've also got PQ2 down here as well. So we can look up these on the schematic to see what we're looking for. And if we switch back to the schematic, hey, wouldn't you know it, PD1 is this dual diode. And if we look a bit over here, we've got PQ1 here. That's this MOSFET that we were talking about. And if we keep going, there's PQ2 as well. So you can see how what we found here is the cluster of components that is the protection circuit for the power supply ID or power sense ID. So PD1 saw 19 volts from the charger and exploded, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. It did exactly what it was intended to do and protected the rest of the circuit from getting hit by 19 volts. So that's why our power supply ID is not working, and that's why this laptop does not detect chargers. So I said earlier on that I kind of spoiled this for myself, and what I meant by that is I was taking some measurements from this to see how it was behaving, and what I wanted to do is at the beginning of this video I would plug in the laptop and go, look, it's not working, and then we could go through and take measurements and so on. Unfortunately, while I was taking measurements, my probe slipped, and as you can see, this guy is very wobbly, and I think that pin has already let go, which means all of the measurements are kind of invalid. So I can sit here and I can take some measurements, but I don't think we're actually going to see anything meaningful. But before I slipped and knocked that pin loose from this guy, because it's falling apart, you know, I was seeing continuity in both directions. This diode was shorted in, well, this diode was partially shorted in both directions. In any case, this diode is completely exploded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully remove it from the board, and I'm going to try the laptop to see if it is detecting a charger again. Now, we are going to want to replace this if we can, because remember, this diode has just saved the laptop, so kind of want to replace it just so it has an opportunity to save the laptop again if the DC jack gets broken a second time. It would be very easy to just take this off the board and go, there we go, it works again. But this is why we replace components. The components, contrary to popular belief, a lot of components are there for a reason. And yes, the laptop will often work without them, but if you can replace them, you really should. Because that means that if they save the laptop once, they might just save it again. So in the interest of good practice, we will replace damaged components. And it's also more educational that way. Instead of just ripping this off the board and going, hey, look at that, I fixed it because I'm a genius. We've actually looked at this, understood what it does, and replaced it. So that's the plan. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get my hot air station turned on, and I'm going to take that guy off the board, preferably without ruining the pads it's on. So I'm setting my hot air to 420 degrees at about 2/3 airflow, and I'm going to put a load of flux on here because the flux can just help conduct the heat better and get the solder moving in a pleasing manner. We're probably going to blow most of it off, but what I don't want to do is tear up that pad as we pull this off, because that pad is delicate. We can see that already. There we go. I picked the crappiest tweezers out the mug. Oh my god. Oh no. Right, hold on. Let's fix that. I'm going to get the good tweezers. And we're going to very quickly just set those other components straight. Oh no, the good tweezers are bent as well. That's fine, I have more. It's good enough though. Alright, there we go. Right, and I just want to take off that little leg there. There we go. And I'll just put a little bit of alcohol down there and just clean up the flux. I did a terrible job of that cleanup. That's fine, that's good enough. Right, I didn't find any replacement dual diodes, but I have got these 2-pin diodes here. So these are 2-pin TVS diodes, and these will also be good enough. I can put one across the 2 pins because, as we saw on the schematic, the 3rd pin is just not connected. They're just using a dual diode, presumably because they're using them elsewhere on the board. So they had them on the bill of materials already. So how do we know if these diodes I've got are also good enough? Well, a TVS diode is pretty basic. You don't really need the ratings for it to be particularly precise. So if we have a look at this diagram on Stack Exchange here, this is a really good explanation for the TVS diode. The numbers that we care about are the clamped transient and the transient voltage. So transient voltage, in this instance, this is the amount that we're trying to protect against. So let's say we want to protect against 19 volts from the charger. The clamped transient is what we're going to bring that voltage down to. So if our protected load is a circuit that is running at, say, 5 volts, our clamped transient needs to be 5 volts or lower. We need to get the voltage down to that level. Then the transient voltage is essentially our activation voltage. That's when we're going to actually that's when the diode is going to break down. So if we look at this random diode here on eBay, our transient voltage is 9.2 volts. Anything above that is going to initiate an avalanche breakdown. So as soon as the voltage peaks to 9.2, it's going to break down and it's going to clamp down to 5 volts. So that's what these two values mean. I believe I've got that correct. Citation needed. If I'm wrong, someone tell me in the comments. But I'm 99% certain that's what it's referring to. So the high value, that's what we're protecting against, and the low value, that's what we will clamp down to. However, once again, for the purposes of protection like this, we don't need to be really precise. We need an approximation that's just going to clip a gross overvoltage down to something that the rest of the circuit is probably going to survive. So these diodes that I bought, these are actually, I don't remember the actual rating on these, but I actually bought them to repair another Dell motherboard a while back. So I know that these are the correct rating. I just can't remember the exact rating that they're for. But they're probably going to be fairly similar to the one that I was looking at on eBay. They're probably going to be approximately like 9-ish volts transient, clipping down to probably like 4 or 5 volts around that area. Which again is still arguably too high, but that means that the rest of the circuit is going to survive that transient instead of just all getting melted by 19 volts from the charger. So let's get one of these boys out. Now, another thing to note is you'll notice that the diode that I'm placing on here, it has a marking on it here, Y7, but there's no indicator as to where the anode or cathode is. And the reason is this TVS diode is actually bidirectional. And what that means is that it has 2 Zener diodes in it that are pointing against each other. So it actually protects in both directions. So the important thing is that means it doesn't matter what way round it goes on the board. If it was a unidirectional TVS diode, we would need to ensure that it is the correct way around. Otherwise, it would just clamp the entire rail to ground. Right, I'm going to hold this in place just so I don't blow it away. And just as soon as I see the solder melt, I can let go and it should just magnet into place. There we go. That'll do. Right, so that motherboard should be fixed now. So let's put this back in the chassis and see if it is detecting charges. Okay, right. I think we've got enough to do a test now, so let's plug in a charger and see if we get a charge light first of all. I haven't got the battery connected, so we might not get a charge light. Let's see if it turns on. Right, it's turned on. That's a good sign. I'm going to spam into BIOS setup. Oh, I think this is one of those Inspirons that doesn't have the fancy Dell BIOS. So actually, I might have to plug in the the battery and the SSD and actually get to Windows to find out if this thing is working properly. If it turns on and gets through to BIOS without having a hissy fit, though, that'll be a good sign. And there we go, everyone. AC adapter type, 130 watts. So it's reading the AC adapter just fine. So there we go, everyone. So this one was a very easy example of this fault. A simple DC jack replacement turned into something a bit more complicated, but thankfully we actually had a literal smoking gun on the board. The first protection diode had exploded, and it was leaking current, thus preventing communication on the one-wire circuit. So that has been resolved, and now this laptop will work just fine. If you're unlucky, as I have been in the past, this can be more complicated, where you can have other issues with other parts of that protection circuit. But hopefully this video has shown you what that protection circuit looks like and how to approach it, because you won't see it on other brands of laptop, which is why a lot of people can get stuck on this one and just have no idea where to even get started with a sense pin that doesn't work. It would have been nice if I'd been recording from the start, so we would have had a bit more organic discovery, but that's how this goes sometimes. Sometimes I'm busy and I just don't have time to record every single thing, or as was the case with this one, I didn't think this was going to turn into a board repair when I started it. I thought it was going to be a 5-minute job of changing a DC jack. Anyway, thank you everyone for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.